Welcome back, students. Welcome to week 4. This week we're going to unpack the basics of the immune system. It's very exciting. It's one of my favorite systems in the body. Let's get to it. Welcome back. Dr. G here again. Let's talk about some immunology basics. We're only going to scratch the surface here so that we have the tools we need to discuss vaccines in a later module. So you've probably heard of white blood cells, right? Well, you may not know that there are many different types of white blood cells. Practically speaking, we can categorize white blood cells into 3 different groups. These 3 groups are granulocytes, monocytes, and lymphocytes. These 3 groups contain several types of cells within them. For example, within the granulocyte group, we have neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Within the monocyte group, we have dendritic cells and macrophages. And within the lymphocyte group, we have T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. So you may be wondering why these are categorized like this. Well, simply put, these cells are categorized based upon where they come from in the body and where they mature. Let's talk more about that in a moment. Now that we know who the players are, let's zoom out and take a wide-angle view at the entire immune system. The immune system is broken into 2 parts: innate immunity and adaptive immunity. Now, we're all born with innate immunity, hence the name innate. In comparison to our adaptive immunity, innate immunity is considered to be non-specialized, but don't get me wrong, innate immunity is absolutely critical and really cool. It's just not as specialized as our adaptive immunity. So what do I mean by specialized or not specialized? Let me try to explain. Our innate immunity consists of granulocytes, monocytes, and natural killer cells. Remember neutrophils? Well, it's possible that you've seen a video of a neutrophil chasing around a bacterium. This is a process known as chemotaxis, and the neutrophil is literally chasing the chemical trail of the bacterium because it's different or non-self. That's kind of what we mean by non-specialized. Neutrophils, macrophages, dendritic cells, natural killer cells go after bacteria and viruses and other microbes just because they appear foreign or different. Now, as I said, this is definitely cool and pretty special, but again, not as specialized as the cells that are responsible for our adaptive immunity. These are the T cells and the B cells. As I mentioned before, we are born with innate immunity, which of course is a good thing, right? That said, our adaptive immunity is something that we're not born with. This is literally developing in all of us over the course of our entire lifetimes. Let me add a special caveat though to that. Mothers do pass on some antibodies across the placenta and through breast milk, but that's just temporary until her child starts to develop an adaptive immune system of their own. But let's move on and take a look at where B cells and T cells come from, and then we'll talk about what they do. In this illustration from the Fundamentals of Anatomy and Physiology by Pearson Publishing, you can see that B cells and T cells start in exactly the same place. However, B cells mature in the bone marrow, hence their name, B cells for bone. T cells, however, mature in the thymus, Thymus, hence the name, T cells. Now, the thymus is kind of an often ignored gland that's located in our chest just above our heart, in case you're wondering where the thymus is. Now, in this illustration, you see the terms immune surveillance, antibody-mediated immunity, and cell-mediated immunity. I know that sounds a little complicated, and it's really not. We're going to unpack those terms after I show you how these cells can be subdivided further by specialization. As you can see in the illustration, T cells make up about 80% of our body's white blood cells. But as you can see, they're subdivided further by specialty. So we have different types of T cells, which all have different jobs. We have helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. That brings me to those terms that I just mentioned: immune surveillance, antibody-mediated immunity, and cell-mediated immunity. Well, immune surveillance is kind of a good way to just describe innate immunity. Natural killer cells and macrophages, for example, circulate through the bloodstream and non-specifically, remember that non-specific term, non-specifically eliminate foreign invaders such as bacteria, viruses, and other microbes. They just see something different and they do something about it. So once they encounter these foreign invaders, some of these cells, like dendritic cells and macrophages, can chew these invaders up. In fact, that's a process known as phagocytosis. Phago means to eat. Cytosis is cell, so a cell that eats. So yeah, macrophages and dendritic cells can phagocytose those invaders. Now, when our friend the macrophage or dendritic cell phagocytoses a virus, for example, that phagocyte, which again is the macrophage or the dendritic cell, that phagocyte places a piece of an invading virus on its surface. That's right. This is called antigen presentation. So this ability makes dendritic cells and macrophages antigen-presenting cells, or APCs for short. This is a key component of adaptive immunity. So our cells are engaged in immune surveillance, but at the same time, our adaptive immunity is building. So let's continue by talking about the two types of adaptive immunity that result. That is these terms cell-mediated immunity and antibody-mediated immunity. In antibody-mediated immunity, the process of shuttling those viral particles to the phagocyte's cell will set off a chain of events. So you have the macrophage or the dendritic cell will phagocytose the virus, and they'll chew up the virus particles and they'll shuttle that virus particle to the surface, to its own surface, and that makes it an antigen presenting cell. Well, when that happens, there's a chain of events that happens. First, that activates the helper T cells or T helper cells. It also activates the T memory cells. Now, T memory cells are the ones that take notes about what they've seen, whether it's a specific virus or a specific particle or a specific, some sort of invader, right? This will then signal the activation of B cells, specifically the B memory cells and the B effector cells. Now, B effector cells are sometimes referred to as plasma cells. In fact, they're most often referred to as plasma cells. But whenever you hear plasma cells, just know that that's a B effector cell. Now here's the cool bit, is that those plasma cells will begin to produce and secrete antibodies that are specific to the viral fragment that was presented on the APC, on the antigen presenting cell. Pretty cool, huh? Now, in cell-mediated immunity, cytotoxic T cells have the ability to recognize specific proteins that will cause them to physically bind to foreign invading cells, such as viruses and bacteria, and destroy them. But they also have the ability to physically bind to our own cells that have been marked with a viral particle on its cell surface. So as cytotoxic T cells begin to bind and destroy marked cells, they send out a chemical signal that tells B cells to begin to proliferate as well. And I should point out, as I mentioned, that B cells actually come in those two different flavors. There's the B cells, the memory B cells, and the effector B cell. So it's the effector cells or the plasma cells that start producing and secreting antibodies that are specific to the antigen that was encountered by our friend the macrophage or the dendritic cell. And the B memory cells and the T memory cells are the ones taking notes to make sure that if we encounter that particle again, then we know what to do with it. Now, you may be wondering, what does this have to do with COVID-19 or the COVID-19 vaccine? Well, remember those types of T cells and B cells that are memory cells? Basically, these cells are the ones that are taking the notes of the viral invader and what it looks like, so that the body will be ready if they invade again. The notes can be based upon natural infection, so say you come into contact with someone who has COVID-19. But it also works the same with vaccines. Our bodies respond to an initial infection by priming the immune system to be aware or adapt to a new invader. Now, in our upcoming video, Viruses, Variants, and Vaccines, I will describe exactly how the two types of COVID-19 vaccines work. And now that you understand basic immunology, it'll all make sense to you. Now, again, there's an entire course called Immunology, and I have, as promised, just scratched the surface on this topic. So know that if you want to know more information or better understand immunology, come talk to me and I'll turn you on to some books or websites or maybe even a professor that teaches immunology. But know that you've got a little bit of information that will help you understand some basics that will help you understand COVID-19 and the COVID-19 vaccine better. I'll see you in our upcoming videos.